So we got the transmission out of the truck, 4R100. We got most of the fluid drained. Make sure you've got something set up to catch more fluid because transmissions are never completely dry. No matter what you do, you're always gonna have some transmission fluid leaking out of this thing as you're tearing it apart. So be ready for that. The first thing we're gonna wanna take off is this bypass. It's generally recommended to replace it. I would say definitely do it. It's not something you wanna risk going bad because you could have some real serious damage to your transmission. It's basically a safety in case your transmission cooler or your lines get plugged. It's a safety and it keeps everything from breaking, but it's not likely those things will break, but in case they do, it's really nice to have. It's a really cheap part. I think they're only like $10. I'd rather spend $10 now than another $300 on a rebuild when this thing overheats and starts warping things. So that'll be the first thing we tear down. We're not gonna get all the way through today, but we will get the external components, all the large components removed, and then we'll start tearing apart all the center gears, all the clutches, all those things on another day. But we'll get the valve bodies, we'll get all the sensors, we'll get it torn down for our first quick bench tear down today. So here we are on the outside of our transmission. One of the first things we're gonna wanna do, clean some of this dirt off. But got a bolt there for this speed sensor. I'm gonna keep everything in these buckets. I got a lot of these, I like to use them. They help a lot with keeping track of things. If you've got cardboard boxes or even just a shelf that you'd like to put stuff on, as long as you can keep track of where it goes later, that's all that really matters. Kind of wiggle that sensor back and forth. It's got an O-ring in there. Sometimes the O-ring gets stiff. You don't want to just pull straight out. You want to kind of wiggle back and forth. It'll break that free. So we'll put that over in our box. This is a vent tube. It just goes to a hose. The hose just runs down in case there's any excess pressure in the transmission. That's not such a big deal to take off right away. Next thing, we'll come over to some of these other things. We got our neutral safety switch. That's also an 8mm. Just 2 bolts there. That's really easy. We'll put that in that same box. Just all our external sensors will go together here. That'll help keep it organized. Kind of wiggle that off too, and that's pretty stiff. That's been on there for a while, so I might need 2 hands for that. There's so much force. Yeah, this thing's broken. Absolutely no way that that's gonna continue to work, so we're just gonna break it right off the rest of the way. Nothing else we can do. Let's see, it's snapped already. It's toast. That is ridiculous, man. So, this is garbage now, the sensor. Watch this. You know what we're gonna do with this sensor? Garbage. It's garbage now. So this is seized on here. We're probably gonna have to cut it off or break it off somehow. We'll have to buy a new range sensor, which is really unfortunate. I didn't want to have to do that. It shouldn't have to be done. This should be designed in a way that they come off easily, but it just is really hard to design around South Dakota weather. It really is. It destroys everything. So I'm going to be very gentle with the grinder. I don't want to cut all the way through because we risk damaging this metal shift shaft. We don't want to do that. We just want to cut through the plastic. So even if we don't quite get all the way through the plastic, that's fine. We'll break it the rest of the way with a screwdriver. Chances are one of those relief cuts was enough, but we're going to do a few just so we don't have to hook the grinder back up. Rather do that than have to mess with it multiple times. So looks like this cut on the side went the deepest. So we're gonna try and shove the screwdriver in there. Just separate this. There we go. Yep, there's no special trick. There's no special notches, no anything. This has got a little plastic tab there that just slides onto here. But it looks like the heat and the cold and the heat and the cold just expanded and contracted this thing until it sealed itself on there, along with some rust and dust and dirt. So before we put this back together, we will grab brake cleaner, degreaser, all sorts of things. We're gonna clean this whole transmission. That'll help with that a lot. The next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna grab our, what was it, a 13mm. Apparently we're gonna break it by hand first because, you know, rust. Once we get to the inside of the transmission, things are gonna come apart a lot easier, but the rust on the outside is pretty extreme. The dirt and debris and things is causing issues, so we'll set that in the bucket with the rest of our parts. And this is something, again, that we want to make sure we replace. It would be nice to replace these inlet and outlet bolts. I don't know if we're going to get that done or not, but we'll definitely clean them up. So the way this works is it's got these holes in the sides here, and it's got the hole through the center. So the hole through the center allows transmission fluid to flow in only one direction out of the transmission in this case, and into the transmission on the other side. So the fluid flows out and it goes up through this hole up to our cooler, and then it comes back in the other side. And what happens is if the cooler gets plugged, this ball will actually allow the fluid to travel up into this tube through these smaller side holes. That way the transmission still keeps circulating fluid from the back to the front, even if the fluid's not getting cooled, which eventually your transmission will get hot from that and it'll tell you to shut the vehicle off, but it'll stop you from causing transmission damage, which would be caused if it got plugged and the front side of your transmission was just dry. This now allows it to still be wet. Even if it's getting hot, it's not dry, which is, you know, extremely better. This is bad. And one reason this is bad is because I don't know what this is. This, I don't know what this is. This is just some piece of metal. I guess maybe it's a friction ring or something. When we get deeper into the transmission, we'll know for sure what this was, but I don't, there's no reason for something like this to be missing. Or anywhere near this section of the transmission. So that is our first bad sign. Again, that's something that is garbage and we're definitely going to throw it away, but we're gonna hold on to it for now because later we might find something broken and say, I wonder if this goes to it, and we can compare the pieces. So we're gonna do that. We're gonna hold on to that for later. Next, this is our park pawl, is what it's called, P-A-W-L. It's called a parking pawl, and essentially it's just a big metal lever that sticks itself into this main output gear. This is your parking gear, is really what it's called. So we're in neutral right now, and as we go into park, you can see from reverse to park, this little lever kicks in. It doesn't allow the transmission to spin. So right now we can go into neutral, and it spins, and we slam it in park, and it'll roll for just a fraction of a turn here, which is hard to do because it's in reverse, but it'll slam itself into park there, and then it won't allow it to turn anymore. So we're gonna take that off, I believe, because this is still on the outer section of the trans. We're not inside the housing just yet. So pull that off. And again, I like to keep pieces together like this. So we'll set that off in our external portion bucket. We'll pull the parking pawl out. Very easy for that to fall apart and for you to lose pieces. So this is just a dowel. This is a spring that goes on here. It all sits together like this. This spring keeps it from going too far one way or the other. This is just a dowel rod. We'll keep all that together. Okay, so you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 here, and then you've got 3 on this side. And especially when it's dirty like mine was, it's hard to see that center one. But don't forget it. So you'll have a bad time. You'll break things if you try to pull it out without that. So, the next step so this pump, pull out our input shaft there, super easy, slides right out, set that off to the side. Next, this pump comes out with this center shaft. We just have to beat on it a little bit, which in our case probably means beating on it a lot of it. We're going to remove our pan, which is going to be full of fluid, which is why we're currently sitting over a garbage can, and I've got several transmission fluid collection pans below and ready. So, purposely did the top bolts first, so we wouldn't lose fluid out of the bottom right away. It's a little distracting and frantic when you're trying to catch dripping oil while removing bolts. So we got all of those out. We're gonna grab a new box for those. All of those together and off to the side. Then we'll grab this pan. Now there's a little bit of RTV on it. It's not much. It's just a touch. As you can see, there's more friction material in our pan. Like I said, that's why it's important to replace your torque converter and other things, because even though we clean the absolute hell out of this, it's still in there. So I'm gonna set that off to the side, out of our way. This fluid, like I said, is just gonna keep dripping. There's no way to stop it. And if you try, you're gonna have a bad time. Put rags and stuff around. There's no way you're ever gonna get this transmission drained completely empty. You just do your best to keep it from making a mess. Now these bolts, I believe, are 8mm. They're definitely not 10s. So we can remove that. You might just have to do this by hand. So grab this first valve body. It's easier with 2 hands. We'll gently pull it up. Flip it over just so you guys can look. It's just a bunch of passageways. It's nothing crazy. So we'll take that, we'll put that in with our bolts so we can keep track of it. Now this, we got a little mesh screen here. We'll pull that out. That we'll have a new one of, but we'll put it in that same box just so we remember where it goes. Now this goes all the way around all of these, so we can't take that off quite yet. But that's our first valve body, and you can't quite tell yet, but in some of these passageways, there are gonna be check balls. So we'll come back and get those. We're gonna go ahead and remove all these little bolts just like we did all the other ones. So I'll come right back after we've done that. All right, so we pulled all the bolts out of here. As some of you have already seen in my previous videos, these can be a little tricky to get out, but we've already had this one out extremely recently. So it shouldn't be too awfully hard to pop it up out of here. There we go. So that comes out. Remember, there's that O-ring there. You want to make sure that's nice and lubricated before you start tugging on it. So we'll just leave all the bolts in that. That'll make it easy to keep track of. We'll set that again in that same box. We'll put it in there gently. We don't want to damage that. Then we'll come and pop all these bolts off here. So we've now removed our next set of bolts here. You can see they're all nice and loose. You always want to give all the bolts a little tug check like that to make sure that they're loose. These ends, again, are studs with a nut on top. Make sure you don't forget those. This is a dual layered valve body, so there's a top and a bottom, but you can't just remove the bottom. Look how long these bolts are. They go all the way through both, so you can't just remove the ones over here. You've got to remove all of them. So we'll start with this smaller top body. Woo! Good news is we have another one of those gaskets. I don't need to worry about saving that one. We're gonna hold on to it anyway. So we'll take this and we'll gently set it over here with the rest of our parts. It doesn't really matter if those bolts fall out. They only go in one way, but we'll set this off to the side, and we'll grab our next layer here, which you can see is connected to our shifter. This is actually one of the first actuators in here. This valve is one of the first things that controls shifting. It'll change the amount of pressure depending on the gear. Oh, and look, we're getting hung up on something, so something was stuck there. So got that out, got most of the fluid drained out. We'll kind of tip it, let it drip and fall however it's going to. Then we'll set that on top of that, and that'll be the end of that box. That is all we're gonna put in that one, so we'll move that out of our way. Then you can see there's check balls here, there's one here, here, they're all over in here. You don't wanna lose them if you don't have them. I have new ones, so I'm not real concerned about them falling out. We're probably gonna tip this transmission and just let a lot of this fluid and stuff drain out. So a good way to do this is to actually grab some compressed air and pop it out, but there we go. We got that. Didn't really damage it too bad, which isn't a big deal because I think I don't have a new one, but I can get a new one if I needed it. But this is just a hydraulically actuated piston, so we're gonna go ahead and pull that out, set that aside. We'll put that with our internal transmission parts in this box here. If you look inside here, 2 of these have threads that are attached to the pump, and the rest of them have threads that are only attached to the transmission. So you can take 2 bolts from the starter, or if you've got 2 other bolts that fit the threads, just make sure they fit the threads. You don't want to damage these threads. You can take a pry bar under those 2 bolts against the housing of the transmission here and just kind of, I don't want to use the word gently because you're going to have to use quite a bit of force, but don't break anything. You know, if it feels like it's not moving when you do this, don't force it to move. gonna damage things, but you can see we're slowly starting to wiggle this thing back and forth, which will eventually allow it to slide out for us here. There's a lot better pry bar for this. Hook it under there, push it up against the case on either side. If I had two of them, it'd be even better. You kind of pull it out on either side, but I've only got one of them that's this shape. Thread this out a couple to be able to get this under on this side. But there we go, look at that. Just gently pries right out, don't have to do much of anything. So now, grab our pump, be ready, because it's heavy. So from this point, everything else should be fairly easy to take apart. So we pulled right here. Got our next piece. Make sure you keep an eye, because there's gonna be a lot of little stuff and it's gonna be falling out real fast. This is supposed to be clamped in here on that next layer. I can already see my clutches are loose. This could have been part of our problem getting our gears to engage, because that's supposed to be holding this clutch pack, this next clutch pack in place, and it clearly isn't. It just fell out of here, just like that when I went to pull this drum out. So we're gonna be very careful with that. There's also some washers and such on the inside here, and bushings and bearings, and you gotta make sure you don't lose any of that. Try and keep all of that together. So something that's nice to have on hand is a good pick set. You can see here I've got a couple different smaller picks here. I've got my larger pick. I used to have a lot more large picks like this. I ended up breaking a bunch of them, but this straight one should still do what I need it to do. I'll hold that in place, and that'll allow me to get this pick down here. And we can move to the next spot with our, I like to call it a safety pick. It just keeps the ring from dropping back down where it was before. This is the gentle way to do it. A lot of the more experienced transmission mechanics can literally just slap these things out in a matter of seconds. It's crazy and impressive and ridiculous. There you go, there's that ring out. We'll take that and we'll set it off to the side and get it ready for this next part. This is our first set of clutches and discs that comes out outside of a drum housing. So you can see there's multiple layers here. You've got a steel, and then a clutch, and then a steel, and then a clutch, steel, clutch, and a steel. You always have a steel on both outsides, and depending on the number of clutches, you'll have a varying number of steels on the inside. If you look, this one steel is super, super thick. So what you can do is, if you can get extra replacement parts, you can get more thin steels like this, and you could add 2 more thin steels and remove this thick one, and have another clutch in here in between, which will give you more durability and more traction, I guess would be the word. It'll give you more gripping force on your gears, which would hold more power. So then next, we're gonna go in, we're gonna pull this little spring right here. We'll pull that out. Now that I've got that ring pushed up, I can take in here and grab the corner of this. Pull that out of the way for now. Pry up and inward on this, which makes the circle a little smaller. As it gets smaller, you can pop it right out of there. Now, some of those rings are really similar in size. You gotta be careful you don't mix them up. And actually, before we can pull the rest of this out, we've reached a good point, a really good point, because I just noticed something. If you look in here on this right-hand side, you can see what looks like a bolt that's kind of sticking through in there. And what that is that's actually these. You can actually swap out the sizes of these. These are what control the pressure that goes to each gear and clamps down, you know, bands and all sorts of other things. So you're gonna wanna be real gentle. I recommend not impacting these, because you can actually strip them or shatter them because they're hollow in the middle. So we'll go ahead and we'll pull those out next. And then this one, just barely threaded in. They're all just barely threaded in. They really don't take much torque at all, because they're not holding anything in. They're just basically like a jet in a carburetor. If you know anything about carburetors, they're just a different size hole that allows a different amount of pressure to go in and out. So these two look to be similar, if not the same sizes. This one is much smaller. Check, it's been a while since I've done this, so don't be too harsh on me if I don't remember all of the steps to disassemble this without having to look something up. But so far, it seems like we're getting through this okay. See these valves here that allow fluid to pass through into this drum here. So there's what the back side of that looks like. And these are passageways to allow fluid flow as well. And this might be our planetary gear set here. What this band does is it sits around the drum here, and when it gets actuated, it clamps onto the drum. I'm gonna need a new one. This one's shot. You can see there's scratches and marks in it, and friction materials. All sorts of torn apart, but inside here is our next set of clutches. We got a set on the outside here. We got another set on the inside, so we need to keep that all together. And it needs to come out in order. We'll keep the band with it as well. Help us be organized. So we're coming to the very end here. This is gonna be the last big gear set to come out, which does not have anything holding it in place. So you can see here we've got teeth on the outside that attach to that previous drum. Then on the inside we've got a locking ring with more clutches and bands. We've got a center pushing there. We've got this. This fell off. It was right here. There's a bearing that we need to hold on to. We'll set that with our last set there. And then we've got another gear. And this one went inside the last one that we removed here. And then we've got this bearing that went inside of that. And then we've got our planetary gear set built in here. And this is really cool, and I'll talk more about this later, but this actually holds multiple gears within one gear set here. I'm gonna try just lifting this vertically and see if I can get these clutches to drop out. I know there's probably a simpler way, but for right now, this is what I'm gonna do. There they came. For this, I'll show you on the back here, is I actually took and I reinstalled the park pawl. That's what that's called, the parking pawl. And we reinstalled it so that this shaft no longer moves. Because that shaft no longer moves, we can actually pry directly on that ring. Your camera's still a little smudgy here. But we can actually pry directly on that ring now because the center shaft won't move. So that's what we're gonna do. Right, so I got one end up. And then just kind of working my way around here to the other side. And there we go. It's finally off. We can pull this ring out. That is what gave me so much trouble. That was easily a half hour or more of time. Wow. So we can push that out. I'll show you what that looks like on the other side here. We can take our park pawl back off. Let's shove that into some gear that's not park. Make it much easier to take this out. Take that along with the dowel rod, along with our spring. Make sure we keep them all together. Put them back in our box where we got them from. Come around to the back side of the transmission here. We'll move some of these out of the way. Make sure we keep them in order to make it easier to go back together. We'll take this, slide that out. It's our output shaft. We'll come back to the inside here, grab our final planetary gear set, which should now slide right out. And there it is. But now our transmission case is fully disassembled and is ready for us to wash.